I'm David Meier, owner at Glenns Creek Distilling, and I'd like to briefly show you some of the highlights of the Old Crow Distillery. Currently, we're standing in a room that I refer to as the granary, and the grain bins up overhead, and we can see the levers here where the operator would pull the lever and the grain would come down. And there's some equipment, obviously, that's been removed from this building, but there is an auger that would carry the grain from this room over to the grain mills. This is really one of my favorite spots because this is all original, with the exception perhaps of these metal beams. But the wood post-construction up there dates back to the late 1800s when the distillery was first built. So it's one of my favorite places because of the significance and the age of the materials and so forth. I want to show you basically how things flow through the distillery here. There's some rail lines here. Most of them have been removed for salvage, but the corn, the train car would come in and empty the corn right over here. And in the first section of the building, there is a corn cleaning operation where they would remove all the stalks and husk and things like that from the grain. And in a distillery, basically everything is powered up and then gravity fed back down. So from the corn cleaning operation, the grain would go up and then into the storage bins that we see inside the granary. And then from the granary, it gets conveyed over to the milling operation, which is on this end of the building here. And from the milling operation, fed up into the scale room, which we're going to go to in a bit to have a look at where they weighed the grains to go into the cooker. Just a little bit of trivia for you. Everywhere on the building where you see the siding is sheet metal instead of stone, that indicates a potential explosion hazard. And actually, grain dust is the greatest explosion hazard at the distillery. And so you see these sections of the building, the granary that we were just in, and the milling operation have sheet metal walls, and that's so that the walls will blow off and not destroy the building. So you'll see starting here with all the windows, the section with the windows up to that awning, that represents the actual entire distillery. The section beyond that is the boiler room, which we'll go into in a moment, and the vast majority of the space in this building was devoted to steam production. We are in the boiler room here, and actually the vast majority of the square footage in this entire distillery is devoted to the production of steam. In 1935, just after Prohibition, National Distillers did a renovation here, and that's when these Westinghouse understoker boilers were installed in 1935. And for those of you who might be car engine people, you can see that this basically looks like the crankshaft of an engine, and the pistons in this case aren't producing compression, but they're actually pushing the coal into the firebox, which is behind here. And the coal hopper is up here. It's a pretty basic system. You would pull on the chain and the coal would fall down into here, and then the understoker would push it into the flame. And Rod Hatt has done an extensive survey of all of our equipment here, and we have a listing of all this historic equipment. So what I'd like to be able to do in this space in some point in the future is clean this up and have this be part of a kind of a historic tour, because these old boilers are pretty cool. So every building on this entire property was steam heated. So Colonel E.H. Taylor, who built the distillery, believed that heated warehouses produced better aged whiskey quicker, and he would be correct, because from about November through April anyway, it's too cold for aging to occur. And so a lot of the steam that was produced here was used to heat the buildings. And the way these boilers operate basically is either on or off, and they really don't like to go off. And so once they fired up the boilers, they would keep producing steam. And steam production is kind of a use it or lose it proposition. If you generate it, you really want to use it. So they heated every building here and even transported some steam down to Old Taylor Distillery just down the road. Looking at this place, you can only imagine how hot and noisy and risky it would have been to work in this section of the building. We have had some folks who used to work in this area come visit us and tell us about working here. But this, according to Rod, this was state-of-the-art technology in 1935. And later there was another boiler added in the 60s when they did an expansion, and that boiler, even though it's a smaller footprint than these boilers, produces more steam than all of the 4 boilers from 1935. So when people ask me, why did Old Crow close, there's several reasons. One is the decline in sales. But the other part is, you can see by 1985, this technology was basically obsolete. And to redo this distillery and bring it up to the same level of capacity would cost hundreds of millions of dollars. And so we're never going to be able to bring this back to what it was, but we're going to try to preserve it and leave the history here so that people can see it. We are in the fermenting room now, and several of the fermenters have been scrapped. But we still have some of the original fermenters here. And the numbering sequence, it threw me off. The numbering sequence actually ran from number 1 here to 2 to 3. And then this is fermenter number 5. And fermenter number 5 has some significance to us because this is where we caught our yeast. And what we did here, we still have the rope here, is we tied the rope to a bucket and then lowered the bucket down to the bottom of the fermenter. It's approximately 25 feet deep. And you can see that the fermenter capacity is 33,958.5 gallons, very precise measurement there. And so these are closed top fermenters, and the pipe coming out of the center is where the carbon dioxide would be removed from this room. So the greatest danger in this portion of the facility is carbon dioxide that's produced by the yeast when it's fermenting. And at this scale, you definitely want to extract that carbon dioxide from the room. So each of these fermenters has piping, and then there's some ventilation as well in here. So we are capturing our yeast right here in the old fermenters that we use in the distillery. All right, so this is really one of my favorite spots in the distillery because from here you can get a clear view of the entire distillery and the space, and it's fantastic. And the distillery was built in 1878, and the important thing there is it was before electricity, so we can see that they used natural light to a great degree with the windows and the big door and the overhead skylights. And you can see in this first section, perhaps, there's an opening in the ceiling, and that's actually where the still went up and through that opening, and then the piping. And then in the back corner was the device called the doubler, and that was the second distillation device, and it also goes up through the ceiling. The still here was 7 feet in diameter and 48 feet tall, so a pretty good size piece of equipment. And all of that equipment has been salvaged for scrap metal in the past. But this is a terrific place, and one of the things I also really like is here's the work schedule, the very last work schedule that was done in 1985, and so has the people's names on there. And this is known as the mashing floor, but actually down below here on this side was where the cookers were. And we're going to go into the scale room, which is just next door here, where the grains would have been weighed and then dropped down into the cookers down below. We're in the scale room here, and the grains would have come from the milling operation, as I said, up into some bins above here, and then they're brought down into these bins. And there's 8 total bins, and they're identical size. 5 of those bins are for corn, 2 of those bins are for rye, and 1 is for barley. So that gives you some idea roughly what the recipe was for the Old Crow bourbon. Now, the part that I really like about this is that the scale here still moves after all this time. And, well, I said it did. Yeah. And you can see that what you do is you pull the scale below a grain bin, pull the lever, grain drops in. When it hits your target weight here that you set, you would close this. And then you roll this directly over the hole in the floor because the cooker's directly below. And then you would open the gate valve here and the grain would fall directly down into the cooker below. And so this large scale was used for the corn, and the smaller scale down there was used for the barley and the rye. And so this is kind of a cool room because it's been less vandalized, I think, than other parts of the distillery, perhaps because we're so high up and it's harder to get here. The other thing that's kind of interesting, one of the challenges in any kind of grain bin situation is, believe it or not, the grain will stick and inside the hopper. And so here they've added later pneumatic vibrators on the sides of the hopper to shake it to make the grains come out. And so those are a relatively recent invention that what people used to do, and you can see these square plates on the side here that have been welded on. That's because they used to have to get up there with a mallet and bang on the side of it to make the grains come out. And then later the pneumatic vibrators were invented, and that helped grain bins to empty more effectively. So that's the grain room.